What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Well, it looks like things just got interesting for that potential Nintendo Direct, as a very reliable source has weighed in, and now people are expecting 2 Directs in the span of about 6 days. But we'll go over all of that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about another major Xbox game, of course, going to PlayStation. They've already announced it, but now we have a release date showing that next month in April, it's going to actually be quite packed for Microsoft. And then we also had some sales updates around Assassin's Creed Shadows, which has become some of the strangest sales discourse I think I've ever seen for a video game, and well, that's saying something. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button or the link in the description down below. And we're going to start today with Silent Hill F, specifically an update around the refusal of classification in Australia, as there was a response actually from the classification board. And we can see this over on Stevivor. Where they say Silent Hill F is not currently classified as refused classification in Australia. This is the statement from the classification board to Stevivor. The March 14th, 2025 entry on the National Classification Database has been removed. Classification decision will be published to the National Classification Database ahead of the game's release. They go on to say, while not confirmed by the classification board, this from Stevivor, this looks to be chalked up to an error by the self-reporting tool. So I guess just an automated system may have just dropped that in there, when there may still be some back and forth currently, we'll say, with Konami and Australia, their classification board, maybe to make this in at just under that, what are they aiming for? The MA 15, or I guess the 18 plus rating. Most likely, I would assume that this game needs some concessions for Australia, just based on the history that we've already gone over when it comes to game ratings. But the fact that it doesn't have refused classification yet, I guess, is a bright spot. But we'll see. There's still plenty of time between now and the game's eventual release. At least we think there is. Also, we had some big news for Hollow Knight, because well, there was some news for Hollow Knight, which any news seems to be big online, and then it trends all over Twitter X, and it's a whole thing, even though, as you can see, it was an update on Steam. SteamDB keeps all the history and stuff for these updates, and it looked like we had some copyright changes for legal lines. They updated the Team Cherry from 2019 to 2025. So the big things happening here. And then also looks like they've added some mention of NVIDIA, I assume their GeForce Now cloud service. So there you go. You'll be able to, I guess, play through GeForce Now in the cloud with Hollow Knight Silksong. So that's really where we are with this. It's just every time even a little thing happens, as we've mentioned before, it explodes online and the hype is through the roof, and so are the expectations. So even down to copyright legal lines being updated on Steam is enough to get things rolling. So it's going to be an interesting day whenever that trailer shows up again. One, to see obviously the response and excitement and hype online, but also if the game is really able to live up to all of this. Oh, and we did have a 10-year anniversary yesterday, and that's for Bloodborne. This game came out March 24th, 2015, and since then people have been asking, not really since then, but even a year or two after that, people have asked for like a patch and stuff for the PS4 Pro. But either way, since then, really, people have been discussing the idea of there being a remaster, a remake, an acknowledgement by Sony. And in fact, yesterday, there seemed to be nothing on Sony's social media accounts. They just kind of, oh yeah, 10-year anniversary, and not a thing. Which was very, very odd. The fact that there's nothing there stood out to a lot of people. Of course, I guess the most recent acknowledgement we've had is at the end of their big PlayStation compilation that they did for their own anniversary, and they had at the end Bloodborne and Persistence, and that was kind of it. So I'd like to think that there's a future at some point where we get a Bloodborne remaster, remake, a patch to unlock the frame rate, even level it off at 60. But at this point, it's hard to think that will ever happen, just because things in the background, Sony being uninterested, it really is hard to say at this point. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with a second Nintendo Direct. At least that's what was posed yesterday when we went through it on Newswave, as there seemed to be some hints towards something else from Nintendo. Now, that didn't necessarily mean a Direct. It could be an announcement on Twitter, or it could be an indie showcase, or even some other small things from third parties that are just coming out on the Switch and they just decide to announce it on their own social media accounts. Well, I did a poll people did not seem like that was going to be a thing. Not really. And people were wondering, of course, if I was setting people up with that poll question. And yeah, that is a great question. But still, we can see this because it looks like we might have something happening this week. This from Nate over on his own account, Nate the Hate, saying to stop the constant questions. Yes, I've heard there is a Nintendo presentation this week. I believe it is on or around Thursday, and it'll be a direct. But I'm not 100% certain on the format at present. So, okay, a direct, but does that mean a partner direct, partner showcase, an indie direct, indie showcase, or a full general direct? I still think it makes sense, as weird as it sounds, because look, you have a direct, in this case, on Thursday. What are you, 5 or 6 days later, going to have a big Switch 2 event? I mean, you can, because if you think about it this way, again, Nintendo can have their big direct even this week, and all those games will technically still work on the Switch 2. All they would be doing is just padding out or setting up some of their year going forward here up to the Switch 2's release, but also beyond that even. Like, I know Pokemon Legends ZA, I don't think that would be in a direct like this. I assume that would just be handled by the Pokemon company on their own time, on their own social accounts where they drop the release date. But outside of that, you could have some smaller indie titles, sure. I mean, it could be Silksong for all we know at this point, but you could have other games, smaller third-party indie titles that are setting up, and then some first-party games, as we assume there will be more ports and remasters, as Planet Robot's been mentioned, Metroid Prime 2 and 3, and I'm sure there could be a few other ones, maybe some Legend of Zelda stuff, you get the idea. But it doesn't necessarily matter because it won't affect the Switch 2, technically. In fact, people buy the Switch 2, even if, say, some of these games come out after the Switch 2 releases, they'll just buy the Switch 1 game and pop it into their system, or they'll buy it right there on the eShop and just use it through backwards compatibility. And I actually think it makes more sense to have it, get as weird as this sounds, before the Switch 2 event as opposed to after, because as soon as the Switch 2 event happens, everyone's going to be thinking about that system specifically and kind of the road to its release and checking out all the games and stuff. I think it's a good idea right now to just get that out there in front of this massive next generation push for Nintendo. Get the calendar really set up because these are games that I figure would be coming out April, May, and then June, maybe some in July, but really in the near future, and just start getting the marketing rolling there along with the Switch 2 stuff. So I mean, it seems like it's going to happen. Yes, Nate's been pretty spot on recently, even down to the Switch 2 trailer itself, when pretty much everyone doubted him, and then, hey, look, there you go. They shadow dropped the Switch 2 hardware reveal, and up until 0 hour, people were after him on social media. Maybe this time we give him the benefit of the doubt. So Thursday is what he's thinking. Some have said Wednesday, but really just Wednesday, Thursday, somewhere in there, an announcement, maybe just another shadow drop of some sort of direct. So we'll get that, and then we roll into next week with the big, you'd say, quote-unquote, main event with the Switch 2 reveal. Next up, let's talk about Microsoft continuing to move games over to the PlayStation 5, and here soon the Switch 2, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But in this case, we didn't need a release date for Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. We have Forza Horizon 5 that's coming out at the end of April, but it seems like Microsoft wanted to fit Indiana Jones in before that even, as they did an entire trailer for it here that was well done. But we now have the release date for the PS5, April 17th. There will be a standard, a premium, and a collector's edition. So like the standard edition is, as it sounds, it's going to be $70. You get a copy of the game. The premium edition at $100 is... This is an interesting one. So while you do get like Temple of Doom outfit, you get a digital art book and stuff, there's downloadable content that'll be launching later on, but they're doing the 2-day early access starting April 15th. The game is already out and available on the Xbox and the PC. It seems strange to do early access then on a release on the PS5. I mean, they're doing what with Forza as well? Okay, sure. I think the data is there that shows that early access releases work, but this is just a strange one because it's like, hey, I mean, it's out there, you know, I get it. Maybe you don't have a PC or an Xbox, you just have a PS5, but this would be a situation I think where most people would wait, but hey, peer pressure, it's proven to work for how many decades now? It'd probably work here as well. Well, okay, so on top of that, with Indiana Jones going to the PS5 April 17th, The Verge, Tom Warren, did kind of talk about some other things that would be happening as Microsoft appears to be ramping up, as expected, for more releases moving over to not only the PS5, but also the Switch 2, as in, we're seeing Microsoft really start to rapid-fire releases. I mean, Think about in April, South of Midnight, Clear Obscure Expedition 33, which is not a Microsoft game, but they are doing the marketing. It's going into Game Pass, so there is a connection there. And we have Indiana Jones, as we're seeing, right? And then Forza Horizon 5, those just being PS5 releases. Now work in the Switch 2 stuff, and then more PS5 games, and then just their big, like, original first-party day one releases in Game Pass. But this just seems like Microsoft starting to really tap into just the number of studios they have, but also the back catalog of games that they have. So we're hearing things like a Gears of War collection. We're hearing about Halo the Master Chief collection as well. And these are games that I figure would also get pushed to the Switch 2. Could they maybe get Forza Horizon over to the Switch 2? I don't know about Indiana Jones. It's possible, but you kind of get the idea. Once we get that in the mix, we're just going to get a ton of releases still from Microsoft in a year that's already packed for them. So this is something that get out of control for Microsoft. It could really start to snowball to where there's just so much stuff. Maybe they do legitimately think about what they did with Avowed, where they said, oh, there's just too many releases, so it has to be pushed. And I think most of us look at that now as, okay, whatever you say, Microsoft, on that one. But now you start to go, oh, we're kind of running out of like launch weeks at this point as we get further and further into the year, especially that holiday season when a lot of stuff is dropping. Then they might legitimately think of actually delaying stuff out quietly internally into 2026 because it really is that full for them. Next up, let's talk about 8K, which I'm sure many of you out there right now have the 8K set and you're wondering, all right, where's 16K? I mean, we've had 4K forever, right? Well, not necessarily, I know. Shocker to many of you out there. 8K not catching on as much as not only TV manufacturers, but also monitor manufacturers and video card manufacturers maybe you were thinking. And there's a very recent statement that was picked up by PC Guide with BenQ, which you can see here, where the spokesperson at BenQ says, at a high level, it's going to take several years for 8K to really become mainstream. Content development for 8K has just really not kept pace with the display technology. Whether you're talking 8K videos, live streams, and certainly games, there's nothing widely available. As is always the case, once the demand and supply are both in harmony, and once that content starts becoming more widely available, the demand is going to naturally grow. They go on to say that obviously there's a high cost to an 8K panel, and that's going to be a significant barrier, while ballparking a figure of 6 to 10 years before 8K adoption is really widespread. We still might be 6 to 10 years off of 8K adoption. That's kind of wild to think about because it does feel like we've just been sitting with 4K for a while. And even then, if you look at like the PC stats on Steam, BenQ even mentioned it here in this interview, a lot of PC gamers do seem to skew just towards 1080p. Like, that's the majority right now in terms of resolution chosen. And if you're playing esports titles and stuff with more minimum spec builds, then you're looking for that frame rate as opposed to resolution of even 1440p or 4K. Still, I do notice, myself included, that at least I've been kind of looking more towards even ultra-wide 1440p. I think that's a sweet spot right now in terms of just the performance you can get out of mid-range video cards, is what they call them at this point, even older video cards. As hard as it is for people to believe, I'm sure out there, despite popular opinion, not everyone's jamming a 5090 into their PC. I'd say the vast majority of people are either on older video cards, like just like last couple of generations, or even just, we'll say, quote unquote, cheaper video cards in the $500 to $600 range, as weird as that sounds, say just cheaper. Back in the day, it was like, oh wow, you have the top end video card. Now you gotta drop like a mortgage payment on one of those to make that work. But I think 8K is still, it's pretty far off in the distance. It might be further than this. And I think this still comes back to diminishing returns as well, because if you look at 4K versus 8K, you go to Best Buy and look, it's just not that noticeable. 1080p to 4K, I think was legitimately like noticeable. It gets so difficult unless you balloon the screen up to like 130 inches or something. Like, you have to get a very, very large display before you start realizing one versus the other. I think that's something else they're going to have to contend with. Is it even worth going to 8K for what is a ridiculous performance hit when it comes to games? Maybe for movies, it's not as big of a deal, or even streaming with data caps, but games, I think a lot of people are fine with at this point, 1080p, 1440p, and then maybe even 4K. if you have the nice build, or I guess technically a PS5 Pro or Xbox Series X with upscaling. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Assassin's Creed Shadows, as we are getting some sales updates. It's that situation where Ubisoft is being kind of coy with everything, very general about the amount of players, which the last update we had was like 2 million players. And since then, we have been getting some information from other outlets, as there were like internal memos going around at Ubisoft, and it seemed like they're happy with what they're seeing right now with Assassin's Creed Shadows, but not to the point where they're prepared to make any definitive statements. Still though, we can see this posted up. This is over on VGC. It says, according to further data seen by VGC, Shadows delivered the second highest day one sales revenue in the franchise's history, behind only Valhalla. Goes on to say, significantly, PC represented around 27% of total activations, which likely encompasses full sales and subscription downloads via Ubisoft Plus, with Steam playing a significant role in that performance. Now, to piggyback off of that, we have Tom Henderson, who says behind the scenes data, this is through Ubisoft sources, Valhalla day one player numbers were 2.55 million. Odyssey day one player numbers were 430,000, and then Shadows day two player numbers were 2.2 million. Apparently, he didn't have the Shadows day one numbers, just day two from his from the internal sources here at Ubisoft. We do know that they announced in less than 24 hours they had hit 1 million players, but as you see here, he's actually going off of more, I'd say more specific numbers here at 2.2 million. Goes on to say Shadows should do about 6 million in its first month on its trajectory. Valhalla did 8 million. That in terms of players. And the thing it's interesting, people seem really on Ubisoft like, hey, how many copies have you sold? And that would make this a lot easier, wouldn't it? But if you look back at Valhalla, they were kind of coy about those numbers too. They did say after a week, so hey, we'll see with this. Maybe Thursday or Friday to end out this week, they do post something about where Shadows falls in terms of actual sales numbers. But with Valhalla, they really didn't tell us much either, just that it was the fastest selling Assassin's Creed game, and people grabbed 1.8 million players out of their press release. But if you look at the press release, it just mentioned 1.8 million players have won a drinking game in Valhalla. That's where it came from, because that was the only real number we had to go on. And since then, they mostly spoke of revenue, where like February 2022, they said the game had earned $1 billion. That is clearly what Ubisoft would prefer to talk about in terms of just money generated, because that's what's going to speak to investors specifically. You could tell them you sold 10 million copies like a year from now. How many of those are on that Ubisoft discount that's going to happen in 3 months on this game, in terms of like, oh, it's going to be cut down by 30% on a sale. By the end of the year, but Black Friday, it'd be 50% off, maybe more. So that's why they're mostly talking about generating revenue. Here's the thing though, if you're genuinely interested in the sales numbers, which from what I see online, some people either want this game to fail spectacularly or be the greatest selling game of all time. There's no like in between. Here's where I think Shadows is going to fall when it's all said and done. I think it'll be better than Odyssey, but less than Valhalla. That's pretty much it. I think it'll be in like the second best selling Assassin's Creed game ever made. And that's kind of it. So it'll be kind of like the review scores, where I was just like, oh, okay. Just very uneventful. Yeah, low 80s, sure. Similar situation here. About where you'd expect. But hey, if you want to keep an eye out for some of the sales figures that'll be coming up, keep an eye on the Famitsu sales charts, because those will give us like just hard numbers on this. And it'll be interesting to see how it fares in Japan, where Assassin's Creed Valhalla between PS4 and PS5 on launch week came out to around 50,000 copies physically sold. So hey, we'll see with Famitsu, maybe you can break that and actually do fairly well then in Japan for an Assassin's Creed game, or come in below that and you go, okay, there you go. Japan just completely rejected this game. Otherwise, the Circana sales results will happen next month towards the end of April. And at that point, we'll see how it did in terms of the charts, and we'll probably get some additional data from Matt Piscatella as to where it ranks in terms of just Assassin's Creed launches overall. Also, a lot of people seem to be hanging on to this as either Ubisoft going away because of this game doing poorly, or being completely revived because it did really well. I don't think either would either destroy or save Ubisoft. Ubisoft got into their current position they are, to this hole that they've dug, because of multiple poor releases and poor decisions. So it would take multiple good releases and good decisions to get them out of it. And if they did sputter badly from this, I think they would get like a bailout from Tencent or something. They'd figure out something there, because the intellectual properties that they do own are still somewhat valuable. So yeah, maybe they'll still get bought by Tencent. And I actually think that's still a very likely scenario where Tencent comes in and just infuses a bunch of cash, takes a large portion of ownership of the company, but one way or the other, next year, most likely Ubisoft will still be around. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, are you planning on buying Indiana Jones and the Great Circle or Forza Horizon 5 on PS5 at some point? Okay, so 18% say they are buying Indiana Jones, 8% are just buying both, and then 7% say yes, Forza Horizon 5, and then 67% are just not interested in either game on the PS5. I was just curious to see where people were falling on this one, and if some are legitimately just waiting for it to come out on the PS5, as, again, I'm sure there are many people who are just tied to the PlayStation ecosystem, maybe through trophies, or just that's the system you own, but I'm interested to see how this works out for Microsoft in the long run, if there is significant revenue to generate from these later releases, which hey, we'll also find out about this in some of the other sales charts with things like Circana, as they'll tell us how much of an impact this had and how far maybe it jumped it up a sales chart. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from Tyrell, who says, good on Tony for demanding Bam's inclusion. His loyalty is commendable. Yeah, I know Bam Margera went through a really tough time there for a while in his life. He had a lot of substance issues, and it seemed like he was coming around and he was getting better. And even if he has some hiccups here and there throughout, just the fact that he is at least going in the right direction. I mean, if you're Tony and you're a friend, or even in this case, if it's like just a business decision, for one, it would obviously be good to have him in the games, and then also for the future with something like Tony Hawk's Underground 1 and 2. But also, this might be something more or less to kind of uplift him a bit there. And if you're Tony Hawk, you go, you know what? This is where I do pull the Tony Hawk card. I go, do you know who I am? All right. We're going to go get Bam, and he's getting scanned, and he's going in the game. And if that's the case, hey, good for Tony Hawk on that. It's good to see, again, Bam kind of getting into a better headspace. And yeah, I can see this being something that would, of course, just help him going forward. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card. Or maybe to hear more about Microsoft's next generation strategy, as we are starting to get bits and pieces of that here going into 2025, I'll leave that right below it. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.